Hello and welcome to this little chat I'm having with Rodney Sharman, all about Mozart, about our month of Mozart at the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. I'm Otto Tausk, the music director of the VSO, and after our talk, we'll be very happy to take some questions and answers. If you like to ask us some questions, you can send them to pr@vancouversymphony.ca, and at the end of our talk, we will try and answer some of your questions if you have them. So we have a month of Mozart. Mozart is maybe the composer dearest to my heart, first of all. It's the composer that the first time I worked with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, we played a Mozart symphony. So it was my first meeting with the Vancouver Orchestra. And later on, we did wonderful concerts with the last three symphonies of Mozart, which was maybe one of the dearest concerts I've done with the VSO so far, and it made a very strong, it built a very strong connection between the orchestra and myself, and I think it's because of the music. I think it's because of Mozart's notes that we made that connection, and I do hope that if you visit theconcerthall.ca and you listen to the VSO play Mozart in many different ways and many different forms, you can make that same connection to that music. Tomorrow we'll have his very first and his very last symphony on the program, number 1 and number 41. Later on I'll talk to Rodney about that. But there's much more. There will be works by composers that were influenced by Mozart as well, like Mahler, Gulda, Schnittke. Hello, Rodney.
And don't forget Jocelyn Morlock.
And don't forget Jocelyn Morlock. There's so much. Rodney was the composer in residence at the VSO some years ago. But that's not actually where my connection to Rodney is the strongest. My connection to Rodney actually finds its roots in Utrecht, because Utrecht is the place I was born. Utrecht is a place in the Netherlands. And I think, Rodney, you have a strong connection to Utrecht as well.
Yes, I was a composer in residence artist in residence at the Institute of Sonology in Utrecht, which is when the old days when people made electronic music, as we called it then, not electroacoustic music, when we made it the old-fashioned way with synthesizers, making the sounds ourselves, listening to them, and then recording them on reel-to-reel tape. And my mentor there, and actually who helped me write pieces, was Jaap Vink. If you remember Jaap Vink, who's a vastly underrated composer, genius, brilliant man, wonderful ears, at such a strange place. It was in Plompertorengracht, which means the canal of the big fat tower.
Absolutely.
It had been the headquarters of the SS during the Second World War, and in order to get a reverb, now remember, this is long before there was such a thing as the digital work that we're doing now. In order to get the reverb in the old days, they used the bunker at the back. And there was a chamber in the bunker that was used to make the sounds echo. That's how reverb was created in the early days of electronic music.
But this was, I just try to imagine how that works. You were like in a kind of a studio making all these sounds, or what was it like?
Correct. That's correct. I mean, after all, composers are at heart sound freaks, right? Mozart, fantastic sound freak, which we will be talking about later. But of course, as a kind of sound freak, we were making our sounds ourselves in those days. And isn't Philips from the Netherlands was the first company to develop the cassette tape. Like in those days, this was absolute cutting edge technology.
Exactly. And it's also where the compact disc was developed to what it later became.
And the very first recordings that you made that could speed up without the sound going up through a combination of these rotating heads. Of course, this is all ancient technology now, but this was very, very current technology when I was in my 20s.
And I think in a way, to tell a bit more about what happens in the Netherlands right now is that I think the technology thing is still going very, very fast. So for instance, this week I've started to work on a new opera by a Dutch composer. I'm sure you know Michel van der A.
Yes.
And Michel van der A is very clever with technique and all that kind of thing. And for instance, what is used very often in music nowadays is the additional sound files or the video images or the extra soundtracks. And the biggest problem for musicians and conductors is that to make it really sync, the composers want you to use a click track, which gives you the tempo in your ear, which makes it very unfree as a musician. Now, Michel has developed an incredible machine that turns that process around, which he calls the AA player. And what that does is that someone actually controls the tempo of the click track as a musician in the ensemble, following the conductor. So the conductor just beats the tempo she or he likes, and then the person in the ensemble steers the click track to that tempo and then controls the images and the sound files. So that made me very happy, but that's a totally different subject.
This is actually fantastic because it will change everything. Now,
it's incredible.
Before the cameras came on, you and I were talking actually about new technology in Mozart's time and about how clarinets and basset horns were new. They were the cutting edge instruments that nobody knew, that people got so excited about. And he was somebody too who bridged between the harpsichord and the piano.
Absolutely. And so the basset horns were the larger clarinets. You could have seen them just now in the first clip we played of the Gran Partita. Gran Partita, one of my favorite Mozart works for winds and a double bass. I think in the Gran Partita there's the best music ever written, the Adagio, and it's out of this world, so beautiful, and that brings me actually to my question to you, Rodney. As a composer, you all write the music that comes from inside, comes from you, but you still feel strong connections to other composers. The music you write is very different from the music Mozart wrote. But at the same time, there is a strong connection. Could you explain a bit how that works?
Absolutely. Of course, I feel a strong connection to Mozart, and I think many composers do. But if you think about lineage, we're going to be talking about young Mozart's early pieces. And Mozart lived in London for more than a year, where he studied with Johann Christian Bach. And his very first, that is to say, Wolfgang's very first piano concertos are arrangements, adaptations of Johann Christian Bach's work. So in the same way that Mozart came from J.C. Bach, we have Tchaikovsky writing fake Mozart in his opera The Queen of Spades and in his piece Mozartiana. We have Stravinsky writing fake Tchaikovsky in The Fairy's Kiss. We have many people writing fake Stravinsky in our time. I mean, I don't have to.
This is very interesting.
There is a lineage, a kind of.
I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating what you're mentioning. You're mentioning actually that the composers are connected through time, because they are inspired, and then they bring their own voice to the music. I've been thinking about that actually, because last week we were celebrating the Diepenbrock year coming up in the Netherlands. Now, Diepenbrock being a Dutch composer at the time of Mahler, and being inspired very much by Mahler. Someone asked me the question, don't you think Diepenbrock is a fake Mahler? And I said, well, no, Diepenbrock is not a fake Mahler. Diepenbrock is very much Diepenbrock, like a real personality, but incredibly inspired and influenced by one of the greatest composers ever, Mahler. But Mahler being, and this is what I told the journalist, Mahler actually was very much inspired by Mozart. So let's not forget, all the composers are connected in this way. And there are many composers that feel connected to Mozart. So I mentioned that that we'll also present works by Mahler, by Goulda, and by Jocelyn Morlock, as you so well added there, by Schnittke. Why do you think so many composers feel that connection to Mozart?
Well, when I was a boy, what I was taught was that Mozart's music was perfect. And we just learn it. We just learn that this is the case. And any of us who play instruments, I'm a flute player, again, I had this great teacher who always said, in Mozart, you cannot trick. It's the one composer where you have to put, where everything is so transparent that if one note is out of place, it kind of crumbles. So, Mozart, in a sense, has to be interpreted. And we should talk about that later. But when I was asked to write a piece specifically about Mozart by the CBC, they asked this very strange request. It was for a competition. There had been 3 winners, a soprano, a baritone, and a flute player. And the producer wanted the famous duet La ci darem la mano from Don Giovanni. La ci darem la mano, vorrei, non vorrei. I think I'm getting the words wrong for the next part.
Right. No, vorrei, no, vorrei. No, give me your hand, let's go. If you want to, even if you don't want to.
Exactly. And there was a place in this, I'm rewriting it and putting in my own personality and so on. But there comes this place where he says, let's go. She says, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. They go back and forth. And there's
Andiamo, yes.
Then there are silences in between. And if I just wrote exactly what the orchestra plays on the piano, it sounded stiff and horrible. So I thought, okay, I will arpeggiate, I'll do something else. I'll fill in these silences with something. I don't use my music theory very often, but I tried every single possible chord in these silences. Every single tonal chord, 18th century chord, none of them worked. Indeed, my teachers were right. The music is perfect. Even the silences are perfect because no harmony could be sustained through those silences without ruining the piece.
Very true.
And it's this aspect of Mozart being so fragile in interpretation that it can be destroyed by a bad performance, by an incomprehending performance. I think that draws us. Also, of course, this incredible, vivacious, warm personality and fearlessness in terms of creativity, of writing everything from smutty, dirty little canons for which he wrote his own text, through to the most sublime and transcendent religious pieces. It's all there, everything. The theatrical.
It's interesting you mention the perfectness somehow of his music, that all the notes are exactly in the right place, but also where the notes are not, it's exactly the right choice. And I think that's a fascinating thing, that the moments where you hold your breath in anticipation of what's coming are the most beautiful ones, actually. I'm always struck in Mozart by, I'm always surprised, and that's a fascinating thing, that the music, even though you know it really, really well, and that the music nowadays to our ears sounds like very accessible and in a way easy. It still surprises me, and it has all to do with those very small details, but perfect details. The way he sometimes changes major into minor in a very beautiful way, or the way Mozart talking about his operas. I find it always fascinating to watch what he does with the woodwinds. So you have the wonderful melody in the violins, or you have an aria sung by a soloist. You have the accompaniment. You have the rhythm in the cello. You have the harpsichord accompanying. All these elements, but in the background, very often there are these harmonies in the woodwinds, and if you take them out and look at them really closely, you can spend days listening to a couple of bars of just the woodwinds in Mozart operas. Now, this kind of incredible beauty and almost perfect music. If we have a look at his very first symphony, is that something you recognize in the 8-year-old boy he was?
Well, the 8-year-old boy he was really shines through when you can see the manuscript. If we look at the first page of the Symphony No. 1, could we please see that so everyone can see young Mozart's handwriting? Now, if you look at the top, it's a catalog of all of the pieces, and at the top in German it says that this was written by the little Mozart, der kleineren Mozart, seine Werke, the little Mozart, his complete opuses. Now, if you look, you'll see that there is this big, thick pen that makes the corrections at the top that is clearly also the same handwriting, but with a different pen that comes later. Now, if you'd be so kind as to show us the second page of the symphony. Now, if you look at the bottom of the symphony, you'll see that there's all of this music scratched out with a kind of hatch quality, like the little lines going one way and going another, and a different pen and a different handwriting crossing out canons. Now, canons we all learn as children: row, row, row your boat, etc. Mozart has written a canon that starts in the second violins and goes into the first. But what I presume his father, but it could have been J.C. Bach, crossed it out, and in another handwriting writes with the first violins. So it's crossed out, and in the smaller hand at the bottom of the right-hand corner of the page, you'll see in Italian, unisono col violino primo, in unison with the first violins. It's even more clear in the next page. If you can show us the next page, please. All right, so here you can see all of this music at the top of the page that's been crossed out. Now here, the editor, as it were, has chosen to have the second violins lead, and over the top you see in this spidery handwriting that is not Wolfgang Mozart's, it says col violino secondo, and even the way the D curls up the other way, it's clearly somebody else's handwriting. Then, so all of the layering, all of the complexity, anyone who has seen Peter Schaffer's Amadeus, either the play or the movie, knows that at one point the emperor goes, too many notes, too many notes. So here's Mozart at 8 years old, and somebody else, some grown-up, is telling him too many notes and crossing them all out. The next bit of crossing out is where it says col basso, which means with the basses, and you can see in the middle on the right-hand side of the page, again, all of this crossing out with this thatch pattern, so that all of the independence of the viola part is taken away, and he's asked to play, well, the violas are asked to play in octaves with the basses. If you could go to the next page, please. This one has less. There's nothing really to look at it. It's just we're on our way through the score to the next bit. The following page, please. Here we have more. Now, we often think of Mozart as being someone who has music fully formed in his mind and then simply writes it down. See the number sign at the top there? That's a cut that little Mozart has made. And you see the way that little Mozart crosses out music is just with one line, very elegantly, no need to go out, 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 out with all of these smaller lines. And that little cross, that little marking takes us to the next page, please, where if you look at the bottom and you see that big X in the middle of the lower part, so right in the middle, X is all the way down, that's where the music is supposed to go. And then from that point, the person who's reading the score in the manuscript, the copyist, would keep writing onto the next page, please. And at the end of it, where it says Andante, go back to where that little cross was and then play through to the end. Now, this Andante that we see here, it shows a couple of things about the 18th century. One is that paper was more precious to them than it is to us. And so the moment that there is no need for any more writing down of music, the next movement starts. And in it, if you look at the top line in the middle, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those big round notes there, those are half notes. Those are the horns. Little Mozart somehow puts the horns at the top of the page, and the horns play this tune. Do, re, fa, mi, which strangely connects us from his first symphony to his 41st, his last. It's exactly the same tune. Thank you so much for sharing this score. I'm so pleased that the audience has had the opportunity of seeing the young Mozart's handwriting and also the handwriting of the teacher who's taking out all of this invention that was there even in this little 8-year-old.
Now, I want to talk about that horn motive a little bit later on, connecting us to the big Jupiter symphony. But first, I want to go back to what you said in the beginning when we were looking at the handwriting of the 8-year-old Mozart. You were saying, just to be really clear about what's going on there in the score, you were saying what we're seeing is Mozart's writing is not. Is actually the original is not in the simple form as we know that first symphony. It used to have different voices, making it more spicy, making it more colorful, making it more interesting, making it more revolutionary at the time. And someone else, who knows, maybe it was his father, taking those spicy bits out and making it, I'm not saying making it more boring, but making it less colorful, maybe. Yeah, am I correct?
Certainly making it less simple. Certainly making it more simple and less complex.
Exactly.
Taking out what we call counterpoint, note against note. When we have layers, like in a canon in Row, Row, Row Your Boat, once the second voice starts singing, there's harmony made from the combination of the two voices working independently, but dependently. That's all been taken out so that it's more simple, lyrical. It's simply a melody. It is no longer a melody accompanying itself.
So what we see is, and what we hear now as Mozart's first symphony, written by this genius, was actually even much more genius than we know it.
That's right.
And why don't we know the original? Why isn't it there? Why hasn't there been someone who has taken apart this manuscript and figured out all the original notes and put that into a beautiful new edition?
I did.
You did. There we are.
But it hasn't been. But it's never been published. It's been performed twice. I conducted the premiere of the first symphony in the way that Mozart would have done it, with members of the CBC Vancouver Orchestra back in 2006, and then Bramwell did it again maybe 10 years ago with the Vancouver Symphony.
Fantastic. So why wasn't that published? Why wasn't that? Why don't we all have that manuscript now? Well, how does that work? As
use your connections, Otto. You have way more connections than I do. You use your connections and get it done.
I think everyone would love to hear the real original. Actually, in the end, correct.
The other Mozart editions I made, I translated the smutty canons from German, one of them from German into English, and one of them that was in German, English, Italian, French. I translated that into English.
And so this first symphony, what we just saw was the first movement and the beginning of the second movement.
That's correct.
And there was also a last movement. Were there many corrections to be found in the rest of the score?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No.
So what we've just seen is actually the spicy new edition we will soon have to play in the entire world of Mozart's number one. And at the end of the images we saw, you were talking about this horn motive, and the horn motive is the theme of the very last movement of his very last symphony, which is identical. Now, he didn't write any symphony after that, for the simple reason that he didn't live anymore. The tragic loss of Mozart is a huge loss. Is there any way that he felt this was an important moment, this last symphony, that he felt that I have to make a statement because I feel my life might come to an end soon?
I think there are a couple of factors. One of them actually is his Dutch connection through Baron van Swieten.
Yes.
That towards the end of Mozart's life, Van Swieten was giving him the works of Bach and especially the works of Handel. And so academic forms, old-fashioned forms like the fugue, which is simply the multi-layering of one idea, which in this case is this idea from this first symphony, this do, re, fa, mi, becomes the opening of this fugal subject. So that's one of the factors, is that this symphony has perhaps more of a connection with music from another time. I don't think that when this symphony was written, and when is it? Probably it's 1789. It's yes. It's 2 years before Mozart died. I don't think he had any sense he was dying at that point at all.
No,
I think it's just a great tragedy that the man died so young. I always tell my students to imagine if to think if Mozart had died at the same age as Schubert, when poor Schubert was only 31. In Mozart's final years, we have Eine kleine Nachtmusik, which was possibly his most famous piece of orchestra music, and certainly the most famous piece for string orchestra, along with Vivaldi's Four Seasons.
I think it's actually the most famous piece now in the entire world.
It's quite likely. So we have Eine kleine Nachtmusik, we have the Requiem, we have the Clarinet Concerto, which is possibly one of the most beautiful things he ever wrote. We have his most frequently performed choral piece called Ave Verum Corpus. We have the Magic Flute, and the last two operas. If he had died 5 years younger, not 4, we wouldn't have had even The Marriage of Figaro, which is his most frequently performed opera. Exactly. So much, the last symphonies, the last piano concertos, they're all from these last few years. And it's such a tragedy, really, for culture, that Mozart died so young.
And even dying so young, he left us so many pieces. And he must have worked incredibly hard. There's this. Some time ago, we performed these last three symphonies by Mozart, 39, 40, and 41 in one evening. We did that because I always have the feeling that the last three symphonies kind of belong together as a first, a second, and a third movement in a big piece. Not only because they have let's say the internal connection in the music, but also just because he wrote them in a short period of time. But I've been reading a bit about what the man was doing when he was writing these three symphonies. He was also giving piano lessons. He was attending to his sick wife. He was enduring the death of his 6-month-old daughter. He was moving to another apartment. He had a huge cash flow crisis. So, and probably the list is much longer than this. But to imagine all those things happening in your life, but still being able to write this incredible music.
No, that you have to,
and not only one piece, but so many pieces. How is that possible within one brain, do you think?
No, it's absolutely incredible. And unlike so many composers, like everybody, his cousins, his parents, his friends, the nobility, everyone knew Mozart was going to be famous. So we have more information about him than just about anybody. We have his letters, we have the diaries, we have the drawings, that these drawings and paintings he made for his cousin with whom he shared a sense of humor. We even know that when Mozart went to Paris for the last time in the 1770s and tried to really get some money from the Parisians, it's when we have his so-called Paris symphonies. But he's really wanting to make opera, and it didn't really happen. But we even know that his mother sat back at home in the hotel and drank 2 bottles of red wine a night. We know that because we still have the bill from the hotel. Everybody knew he would be famous. So we have so much in terms of scholarly stuff. For those of you who are interested in Mozart, there are magnificent biographies that you can read. There's also one by an unusual book by Jane Glover, the conductor who conducted the Vancouver Symphony, called Mozart's Women, where he talks specifically about Mozart's mother, his wife, his cousins, you know, and this sort of terrible, wonderful thing of Mozart being in love with one sister and marrying the other, which is the plot of Così fan tutte,
exactly,
his last operas. So how he did it, I mean, how do any of us do it? I mean, if you read his diaries, or you read his day book, like by diary I mean his day book, you see that he was spending time with his children, he was spending time with his wife, he was giving lessons, he was having lunch with famous wealthy people, he was giving concerts, he was going to concerts.
Yeah.
He was, you know, when he traveled, he tried to meet all the famous musicians in every city that he went. And on top of this, he had these marvelous friendships from brilliant literary and musical figures who helped guide his imagination towards greater depth and expressivity. Like Van Swieten, wanting him to know older music better so that his music would indeed become more complex. Or his incredible friendship with Lorenzo da Ponte, which results in these fantastic opera plots. That speak to us even in 200 years later, more.
Exactly. So it's Così fan tutte and Don Giovanni, of course, being inspired by all that. And I'm just thinking a bit more about the way he wrote. And especially because we're doing tomorrow this combination of his first and his last symphony. I think for us, let's say the evolution, the way his music changed during his lifetime is not so obvious to the modern listener, unless you're very well, let's say, unless you know a lot about his music and you dive very deep into it. If you're, let's say, just a music enjoying listener, it's not so easy to hear the big differences between his works during his lifetime. For me, the first and the last symphony are two completely different worlds. And I think the contrast at the time was much stronger experience than we actually hear it nowadays. Like, for instance, the harmonies or the keys the works were written in meant a great deal to the composer, to the musicians, and probably also to the listeners, as how the piece is perceived, is enjoyed. I always find it fascinating, for instance, that if you look at his operas, you will find that certain characters in certain states of mind or emotional turbulence very often relate to the same key the music is written in, and sometimes even to the same tempo the music is written. If it's an adagio or an andante or an allegretto, in F minor means something completely different compared to a D minor, for instance. It always reminds me of Non so più cosa son, cosa faccio, this little aria connecting to Tararam, Tararam, Tararim, this very famous melody in the symphony, which has the same tempo. And so you find these relationships within his music, but also big differences. How do you look at these differences? How do you see Mozart's change over time?
Towards the end of his life, we have two different trajectories. We have one towards greater simplicity, like in the clarinet concerto, and especially in the Magic Flute, that some people have, I think, mistakenly say that he has simplified his musical language. Mm-hmm. And to some degree, it is true. But if you look at the orchestration, and specifically what you were saying before about the independent woodwind writing, mm-hmm. that is asymmetrical with the rest of the ensemble, mm-hmm. There's a kind of sophistication that you don't really see again until the 20th century. Or and it's funny because you've talked about the influence that Mozart had on so many people. Richard Strauss.
Yes.
That when you think of all of these places in Richard Strauss where the voice is singing one thing and the instruments are almost doing the same thing, creating what in music we call heterophony, this almostness of two things being together, sometimes then drifting apart slightly. These sort of magical moments, even in the simplest music. So on one hand, we have this striving for greater simplicity. And on the other, we have greater complexity, as I've mentioned, in part because of his relationship to Van Swieten. Mozart's study of Baroque music went so far that the version that we play of Handel's Messiah with the clarinets and the horns and so on, that's Mozart's arrangement of Handel. In, I think it's 1789, Mozart rearranges Handel's music for later 18th century taste.
It's what you mentioned about the simplicity and the complexity. I find that a fascinating thing, because if you look at his last symphony, the Jupiter Symphony, number 41, the last movement that has this wonderful horn melody originating in the second movement of his first symphony. The last movement, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think how many themes does that last movement actually? It might be even 7 themes in the last movement, and normally you have one theme and then a second theme, and then that's it. But Mozart kind of builds that up in a kind of a Mount Everest of contrapunt, and presents us this incredible, complicated but beautiful architecture, which is if you look at the score, you can spend your lifetime exploring and discovering new things, but when you listen to it, it sounds all natural and logic at the same time. So there is this combination of being so transparent and so, let's say, welcoming to understand for the listener, but at the same time, such a brilliant construction. And maybe those two worlds are actually essential for a genius composition.
Well, why don't we listen now to the second example from the Mozart First Symphony of the second movement, and then so that we can hear this horn theme that we're talking about, and then hear it again in Symphony number 41, so that our audiences at home can hear the connection. So beautiful, and he's 8. He's 8. He's amazing. The level of expressive, like the music breaks your heart.
And I will tell you. So when I was preparing this program, I have two young boys at home, and I was looking at the score, and I played it on Spotify, and I told my kids, why don't you listen to this music? And they were like, this is really beautiful. I know this piece. They were like, this is great music. And they haven't responded that way before to other kind of things that I try to interest them for. So isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's beautiful.
So we heard the horns, and the horns melody comes back in number 41.
Exactly. We should hear that now.
We should hear that now.
Yeah.
Very vivid, very live, very energetic, very different from that slowish kind of movement. But the material, the melodic material, is the same.
The melodic material is the same. Musical prodigies happen, and it's not unusual for musicians to be really good, or at least to be in the beginnings of that you can see something really good at age 10. But anything younger than age 10, you're dealing with an extraordinary person.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, I have only taught 2 such people. One of whom actually, at age 7, I think, had his first piece performed by the Calgary Philharmonic and appeared on the Bill Cosby show. This is some time ago, but in a way, he had parents who were very ambitious for him, much as Mozart had parents who were very ambitious for him. But the light sort of burnt and faded.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually another boy in Mozart's time, Thomas Linley. Thomas Linley the Younger, he's known as. And Mozart and Thomas Linley met when they were children. And Wolfgang was so impressed and relaxed, actually, because he knew there was somebody else like him, somebody who was that good at music. Unfortunately, Thomas Linley died in a boating accident when he was 22. So we have even less music from him. But there, and he's now known, I mean, people know him just as the English Mozart. So we don't even remember his name.
Wow.
Just, this is the English Mozart.
Yes. Wow.
This prodigious ability so young is so rare and so interesting. Yet, according to my friend Trevor, who's the Dean of Medicine at the University of Toronto, music, mathematics, poetry. These are the three places where life experience plays no part in genius.
Fascinating. So one of the other genius composers and musicians we have in our month of Mozart is Gulda, and what we have is the cello concerto played by Henry Shepard, who is our new first principal cellist in the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and Gulda is a composer that combines jazz and classical. Maybe you can call it a hybrid composer. This is something I'm improvising, this term, a hybrid composer, but many styles. His connection to Mozart was actually that he was a master Mozart pianist in his life. It's one of the works that I find fascinating and very refreshing to listen to, and sheds another light on the Mozart connection. We have also Jocelyn Morlock's piece called Zart. Jocelyn Morlock, like you, Rodney, was connected to the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra as composer in residence. She wrote many beautiful pieces, and one of the pieces that are very dear to me is this Zart, which means, well, it's German for gentle or dolce. How would you translate Zart, Rodney?
Tender.
Tender is a beautiful word. Tender is beautiful. And there's a lot of tenderness in Jocelyn's piece. Also a lot of quotations, Mozart quotations, which work wonderfully. We have some Mahler. Mahler, as I mentioned before, Mahler was a great lover of Mozart. Mahler was not only an incredible composer that possibly changed the musical world completely, but he was also a very loved conductor, and he used to conduct a lot of Mozart. And I think even though in the Adagio or the Adagietto we play, that comes from his Fifth Symphony, which is a piece for strings and harp, and is in the middle of this Fifth Symphony. I find it fascinating always that this huge Fifth Symphony, which is maybe his most favorite symphony, which is big orchestra, a dramatic, big piece, which of course in these COVID times, we can't put all those musicians on stage because we have to keep our distancing between the musicians. So we're always looking for pieces that have slightly less number of musicians these days. So we picked the Adagietto from his Fifth Symphony, but it is for me the core piece, the core moment in that symphony. That symphony going maybe like many other works, from darkness to light, from struggle to victory, and there's this key moment in the symphony where it changes, and for me that's always that adagietto moment. The adagietto of Mahler, if I can just spend a couple of seconds about that piece, I could talk forever about that piece, but it's very often treated as a very dramatic and a very, let's say, solemn work. But it was actually a love letter to Alma. He was about to marry her, and instead of writing her a letter with beautiful words, he wrote a letter in music and sent that to her. And it's also very fascinating if you dive into that Mahler adagietto. If you look at the tempi, all conductors take are very different. Some are 14 minutes and some are 7 minutes, so that's twice as fast. And if you listen to one of the very earliest recordings done at the time, they are actually very quick. They're very fast recordings. Now, I love both. I don't have a preference for fast or slow. I just have a preference for very beautiful, for a gorgeous sound, for beautiful lines, and very much adapted to the hall the music is played in. Every hall dictates another tempo. Every orchestra has a different feel about it, and every evening is different. So I don't try to time myself conducting works, but I find it fascinating to think about these differences. And we also have a piece by Schnittke, which is called Mozart à la Haydn, which is a piece for strings and 2 solo violins, played by 2 members of our orchestra, of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, Timothy Steeves and Nicholas Wright, our concertmasters. Mozart à la Haydn is written in a very funny way. Mozart, not in the name M-O-Z-A-R-T, but M-O-Z. How do you call that? Dash? And then
dash is fine.
A-R-T. And A-R-T, art in German, is in the way of. So you have, it's a very funny, humoristic piece with a lot of styles, also some quotations, and even a visual quotation from Haydn, because at the end of the piece, the musicians walk off stage, and the conductor is left on his own with his baton ticking on the music stand, of course, referring to Haydn's Farewell Symphony. This is all on the theconcerthall.ca, and I can really recommend joining us for this month of Mozart. It's fantastic music. It's actually not so expensive to watch and to listen. $15.99 for a 30-day pass. You can enjoy this gorgeous music. We will actually continue with these online concerts for the rest of the season. And it's also possible not only to watch the music live, but also have a listen and have a look at all the pieces we have released so far. So there's a lot to watch and to listen to. I think right now might be a nice moment for some questions. If there are any questions from our listeners and viewers, we will be very happy to try and answer them.
And if you don't have one, I have one for you.
Oh. You have a question for me?
Well, I wanted to know, in the Mahler, because you're doing it with a reduced string section,
yes.
What is that like for you as a conductor? Because normally we want the largest possible orchestra for this.
Yes. That is a very big challenge, because the music really asks for a big, warm and let's say a broad sound. The music kind of changes if the sound changes, and it took a while for me to get used to that. That idea, how to look at that music, the way it comes out is different, but it somehow it stays beautiful. It's still great music, and it becomes more transparent as well, which I think is always a big bonus for music. I'm always looking for transparency. And in a slightly smaller string orchestra helps a great deal in that sense. Having said that, I can't wait for the moment we are back on stage with our huge string orchestra again.
Oh. No, we have some beautiful images of Mozart and his family,
yes,
and of Mozart's teacher when he was in London, Johann Christian Bach. So if we could see some of these lovely etchings and paintings of Mozart. As I said, he was very famous. Everybody knew that he was going to be famous, so people drew him and painted him a lot too. So if we could see some from the time of when he was a child. This particular drawing, well, etching, is from London, from when he was 7 and 8 years old, for the 14 months that he was in London as a child, learning, going to concerts, and of course, currying favor with everyone to make as much money as possible for his parents. Now, there is his father. I had this wonderful teacher when I was a boy, Murray Adaskin, and people used to ask Murray, how do you become a composer? And he would say, choose your parents wisely. Now, we speak about Mozart's father usually with a little bit of derision, but he was one of the 18th century's great violin pedagogues and must have been an absolutely brilliant man for organizing this European tour immediately after the 7 Years' War. Now imagine, Europe has been completely torn apart. Almost 1 million people died in the 7 Years' War. And the year it ends, Wolfgang's father arranges a tour across all of that land, dodging robbers on the road, obviously fluent in English, German, French, and Italian, to bring his children to England. That's Mozart's sister. And if I say her name is Nannerl, probably there'll be somebody in the audience to correct me. Is Nannerl his cousin's name? Who was 11 at the time that Mozart was 7 years old when they went to London. So we haven't. There's Mozart's father, Leopold, performing with the little Mozart at the harpsichord. As I said, he was one of the great violin pedagogues, and was always after Mozart to practice the violin. He always said that Mozart was as gifted a violinist as he was a pianist. There are letters from his father that end like a sort of nagging parent, saying, if you only practice the violin as much as you did the piano, you could be as though his son's talent wasn't enough as it was. This is a painting of Johann Christian Bach, the so-called London Bach, who was actually the most successful and famous of J.S. Bach's children. The one that we know now mostly is C.P.E. Bach, because the music is so inventive and so wild and interesting. But this was the son who was considered the great success, J.S. Bach's son, Johann Christian Bach. And it is with him that Wolfgang studied when he was a little boy. Mm-hmm. And here again is Leopold Mozart, this time in old age, and our researcher, Matthew Bairds, has written that this is actually from near the time of his death. And this, well, little Mozart surrounded by dignitaries from the church and from the nobility. with whom, without whose largesse he would not have been able to continue as an artist.
That's wonderful, beautiful pictures. That's really gorgeous. We get a little peek into his life.
Yeah, it's as I said, everyone knew he was going to be famous, so everybody kept everything.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Rodney. This was fantastic to talk to you and to have us here online. And I only hope that the music of Mozart will be with us forever and ever. I have no doubt, but I can imagine that that it will. You can follow us through all the media links and go to theconcerthall.ca to find out when all the concerts are, where you can find them. And thank you for watching us tonight. Thank you for being with us, Rodney. And I hope to see you very, very soon. All the very best from the Netherlands.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure.